Friends, for today's daily devotional, we'll be looking at Psalm 2. Psalm 2 is a psalm that celebrates the king and speaks of the king's rivalry against his enemies. In this psalm, we will see that human rebellion against God never stops God's plan. Human rebellion never stops God's plan. He does his plan whether the people of the earth rebel against him and oppose him or not. As you look into this psalm, you will see that it's a royal psalm, a psalm that refers to God's majesty and God's reign over the earth. But it is also a messianic psalm. It speaks of the coming one, the Son of God. And so as we go into the psalm, as you look into the text, you will see 4 different stanzas. And so let's take those one at a time. The first stanza speaks of the fact that the nations of the world express their rebellion against God. The nations of the world have their rebellion against God. Verse 1, why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us burst their chains asunder. Let us cast away their cords from us. Right away you see the tone of rebellion from all the peoples of the earth. The people that are generally representing pagan nations, but they obviously would at times represent the people of Israel and even the people of the United States now. But there is a rebellion in the sinful heart of man that stands against God. We're just not separated from God. We are rebellious against God. We set ourselves in opposition to God. Notice it says that they rage, they plot, they set themselves up against God. They take counsel together. They try to organize and coordinate their efforts. But throughout this, they are setting themselves in rebellion and opposition against God. The second paragraph, second stanza, speaks of the God of heaven who enthrones himself, his son, enthrones his son despite the rebellion of men. Verse 4, he who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, as for me, I have set my king on Zion, on my holy hill. That is, no matter how hard they oppose God, no matter how they plan against God, God is sovereign. And because of God's sovereign control, God will accomplish what God's will is. In spite of their opposition, God is going to set his Holy One up. He laughs at them. I once had a dog who was a miniature pincer. The miniature pincer would, he thought that he was a full-grown Doberman. In fact, I describe a miniature pincer as a Chihuahua who dressed up as a Doberman for Halloween and then never took his costume off. Well, this little miniature pincer, when we would walk him, he would bark at everybody, bow his back and show his teeth, and the people would see this tiny little dog just like screaming at them and barking at them, threatening their very lives, and they would laugh. And that would make him even more mad. But God sees the opposition of men, and it's so quaint. It's of such a pathetic result. And God just chuckles and then goes ahead and does what his sovereign will is, which is what is best for humankind. He speaks to them in his anger. He terrifies them in his fury. Like when we would get mad at this dog and speak harshly to him, he would slink off into a corner. God will not have to work hard to overcome this opposition. The third stanza, God speaks of the king who recognizes God's favor upon him. Verse 7, I will tell of the decree. The Lord said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. And so there's a double address here. One, he's speaking to the king of Israel, but then further beyond that, he's speaking of his son. Ultimately, we will know that as Jesus Christ. But the first recipient of this would be the king of Israel. You're my son, today I've begotten you. Well, that's obviously beyond what the king of Israel is, but he is speaking of his favor toward Israel because of his covenant promises through Israel. You see this throughout the Bible, God's favor upon his son, God's favor upon Israel. God's favor upon Israel throughout because of the covenant that he made through Abraham, and that covenant would not only bless Israel, but would culminate in the blessing of all the families of the earth. Then ultimately that son would be the culmination of those promises. The fourth stanza, beginning in verse 10, you see the counsel to submit to the reigning son. The counsel to the kings of the earth. Stop your rebellion, listen, and surrender to the Son. Now therefore, O kings, be wise. Be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear, and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son. Worship the Son. Pay homage to the Son, lest he be angry and you perish in the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. That is, take refuge in him, not those who oppose him. So your best plan, kings of the earth, mayors, governors, presidents, prime ministers, kings, your best option is to submit and worship the God who is in control of all things. Now, there are several principles that are very important for us to take away from this psalm as we meditate on it today. First of all, there are some who are filled with joy over God's sovereign rule, while at the same time others are filled with anger because of the very same thing. The coronation of God's king brought in this psalm people who were angry and people who were joyful. Both reactions at the same time over the same event, over the same person. Second principle to take away is that do not doubt God. No matter what the governments of the earth will do, no matter how many of his people they will oppress or even kill, God will accomplish God's purposes. Now, the fact that God will accomplish his purposes does not mean that we will not experience those times of persecution or times where there is nothing that is joyful in the circumstances of our lives. It does mean that we can know that God is on his throne and that God is doing his plan. The third principle to take away is God is in control of the events of human history. Then beyond that, God is at work in that history, accomplishing his will, not only in the governing of the world, but also in the accomplishment of the redemption of the people of the earth. And then, of course, our best course of action is to submit to the will of this sovereign but holy and loving God. And that will be what is best for us and is best for all those around us. May God bless you and keep you and make his face to shine upon you. We know these things are true because this is the Word of God.